The clinking of cutlery and the low hum of conversations filled the restaurant. Yet for him, everything seemed to fade into silence as his eyes locked on a single table near the window. He had stepped into the room expecting nothing more than a quiet lunch, but instead he froze at the sight that made his chest tighten and his world tilt in disbelief. There she was, his ex-wife, the woman he had not seen in years, the one who had left without a word, sitting with 3 children who could have been his reflection. His breath caught as he gripped the edge of the nearest chair, his mind screaming, questions he could not form into words. The triplets were laughing, their tiny hands reaching for their mother, their faces so hauntingly familiar, it was like looking at his own childhood photographs brought to life. Each one had his eyes, sharp and piercing, the same curve of jaw, the same stubborn lift of the chin, and in that instant he knew this was not some coincidence. No stranger's children could carry his very soul in their faces. The woman noticed him then. Her hand froze mid-air as she held a spoon for one of the children. Her eyes widened and for a heartbeat raw panic flickered across her face before she quickly masked it with a calm smile. But it was too late. He had seen it, that crack of fear, the unspoken truth she had hidden for years. And his heart thundered with rage and longing and betrayal all tangled together like a storm he could not control. He moved closer, each step heavy as if dragging chains behind him. His life had been built on wealth and control, deals struck in towering glass offices, power won with ruthless precision. Yet in this moment he felt powerless, stripped bare, a man undone by 3 innocent faces and the silent accusation in his ex-wife's trembling hands. His voice came out rough when he finally spoke, asking her whose children these were, though deep down he already knew. She tried to answer, but her lips faltered, her eyes darting to the triplets, as if seeking protection from their very presence. The children looked up at him with curiosity, unafraid. One boy tilted his head the exact same way he himself used to when puzzled. Another girl smiled shyly, and it was like seeing a mirror of his own childhood grin. The third child tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking softly who the man was. The question pierced him deeper than any betrayal in business or love ever had. His throat tightened and for a moment he could not breathe, because the answer hung in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. The restaurant around them seemed to blur, the elegant decor, the scent of roasted garlic and fresh bread, the polite chatter of strangers. None of it mattered. What mattered was the truth pressing down like a weight he could not bear. His mind reeled back to the night she left, the argument that tore their marriage apart, her suitcase at the door, her silence when he demanded an explanation, and now, seeing her here with 3 children who bore his very blood, the pieces slammed together with brutal clarity. She had been pregnant when she left, and she had chosen to keep it from him. He felt fire rush through his veins, betrayal igniting every nerve, yet beneath the anger was something more dangerous, something softer, a surge of longing for the years he had missed, the birthdays he had not celebrated, the first steps he had not witnessed, the laughter he had never heard. And it was almost too much. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to hold the children close, to rage at her for stealing what should have been his, but all he could do was stand there trembling, caught between fury and heartbreak. Her voice finally broke the silence. Low and steady though, her hands shook as she set down the spoon. She told him quietly that this was not the place, that they should talk elsewhere, but he refused to move, the weight of wasted years crashing down on him, his chest heaving as he asked her why she would keep something like this from him, why she would deny him his own children, and her eyes filled with tears though she blinked them back. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she hesitated, and that hesitation was an answer in itself. There was more to this story, something darker hidden beneath the surface. The triplets sensed the tension, their laughter fading into uneasy silence. One child clutched his mother's arm tightly, another glanced between them with wide, worried eyes, and the third bit her lip, as though sensing the storm about to break. His heart cracked at their fear, guilt mingling with rage. He had always prided himself on control, on never losing his composure. But right now, control was a ghost slipping through his fingers, and he felt himself teetering on the edge of a cliff he had not even known existed until this moment. She stood slowly, her chair scraping against the polished floor, her chin lifted with defiance, even as her eyes betrayed sorrow. She whispered that they should step outside, that the children did not deserve to see this unravel, and though every muscle in his body wanted to keep demanding answers right here, he forced himself to follow her lead. his fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. Pain a small anchor in a sea of chaos. They walked toward the exit, his pulse hammering in his ears, the triplets watching silently from their table, their innocent faces etched into his memory like a brand he could never erase. As the door swung shut behind them and the cool air of the street rushed over him, he turned to her, the city noise buzzing faintly in the background, his voice low and raw as he demanded the truth. No more evasions, no more hiding. He needed to know everything. Her shoulders sagged, as if the weight of secrets she had carried all these years finally became too heavy, and she looked at him with eyes that held both love and sorrow, and whispered that nothing was as simple as he thought, that the truth could destroy them. Both the words struck him like a blow, confusion knotting in his gut, and for the first time, he felt fear not just of betrayal but of what lay beneath. What kind of truth could be worse than the one already burning him alive? He stared at her, waiting, his entire life balanced on the edge of her next breath, and then, before she could say more, a shadow moved behind them, a voice he had not heard in years, cutting through the tension like a blade, and everything inside him froze once again, because that voice belonged to a man he thought was long gone, a man tied to their past in ways that made his blood run cold. The air grew heavy as that voice echoed behind them, low and sharp with the kind of familiarity that pierced deeper than any blade. He turned slowly, and his breath caught in his throat, because standing there, in the dim glow of the streetlight, was Marcus, the man who had once been his closest friend, his business partner, the very person he had trusted like a brother, yet also the one who had vanished years ago under a cloud of betrayal and whispered rumors. And now, here he was, alive, smirking, eyes filled with secrets that made the millionaire's stomach twist with dread. His ex-wife stiffened, her hand twitching, as if she wanted to reach for the man at her side, but restrained herself. Her lips parted, yet no words came. The silence between the three of them throbbed with unspoken history. The millionaire's heart thundered as rage collided with confusion. He demanded to know what Marcus was doing here, how long he had been in her life, and most of all what he had to do with the children inside the restaurant. His voice cracked with raw fury, though he tried to keep it low, his world spinning as questions piled up faster than he could breathe. Marcus only smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that held no warmth, and said that some truths were not meant to stay hidden forever, that it was only a matter of time before the past came crashing down. His words dripped with venom, yet carried a strange satisfaction, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. His ex-wife turned sharply to him, pleading for silence, her eyes wild with desperation. But Marcus ignored her, stepping closer, his shoes clicking against the pavement in rhythm with the millionaire's pounding heart. He whispered that the children looked just like him for a reason, but that reason was far darker than anyone could imagine. The millionaire's mind reeled, anger boiling as he grabbed Marcus by the collar, demanding clarity, demanding to know if Marcus was claiming to be the father. But Marcus only chuckled, a sound that sent chills down his spine, and said not everything was about blood. Sometimes it was about power, sometimes it was about choice. The words made no sense, yet carried a threat hidden between the lines. The ex-wife stepped between them then, her voice sharp as she ordered both men to stop, her hands trembling yet her stance firm. She said the children were innocent, that none of this should touch them. Her voice cracked with emotion, and for the first time the millionaire saw the depth of fear in her eyes, a fear that was not of him but of Marcus. Questions spun in his mind. Why would she fear Marcus more than she feared losing everything by keeping the children a secret? Unless Marcus had been part of that secret all along. The thought twisted his gut. He turned to her, demanding answers, demanding she choose honesty. At last, she closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength, and when she opened them, tears shone under the streetlights. She whispered that the night she left him she had no choice, that someone had threatened her, that Marcus had been the shadow pulling the strings, and that the children's very survival depended on her silence. The confession struck him like lightning, stealing his breath, rage and sorrow colliding in a storm he could not contain. Marcus sneered at her words, his expression darkening. He said she was understood the game. He leaned closer to the millionaire and murmured that the empire they once built together had enemies, enemies who would destroy everything, that she had been caught in the crossfire, and that the triplets were not just children, but leverage that kept both of them alive. The millionaire's fists shook as he tried to process the madness. Every instinct told him Marcus was twisting the truth, Yet the trembling in his ex-wife's body told him there was at least some shard of reality in the nightmare unfolding before him. His world tilted. All those years of loneliness, the wealth that had felt hollow, the nights of wondering why she had left without explanation. And now, to find out that not only had she borne his children, but she had been living in the shadows of threats and secrets. He wanted to protect her, to shield the triplets. But fury toward Marcus roared hotter with every breath. Marcus smirked again and whispered that this was only the beginning, that soon everything would be revealed. And then he slipped into the shadows of the street, vanishing as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind a silence heavy with dread. The millionaire turned back to his ex-wife, his voice ragged as he demanded the full truth. This time, no more fragments, no more evasions. He told her that whatever Marcus had over her, they could fight it together. But she shook her head violently, her tears spilling freely now. She whispered that Marcus was not lying about one thing. There were enemies, powerful enemies, and she had done everything in her power to keep the children safe, that leaving him was the only way to protect them all. Her words sliced through him like broken glass, the betrayal and the love twisted together, leaving him torn between rage at being shut out and awe at the sacrifice she had borne alone. She reached for his hand but pulled back before touching him, as if she had no right, her voice trembling as she said the children could never know the truth, not yet, not until the time was right. He shook his head in disbelief, telling her the time was now, that lies had already stolen too many years, but she begged him to wait, begged him to trust her one last time, her eyes burning with desperation. And for a moment he faltered, torn between his need for answers and the undeniable ache in his cliff for the woman he once loved and the children he had just discovered. The night deepened around them, the city lights flickering in the distance, the world moving on, unaware of the storm raging in the shadows. He stood in silence, his fists unclenching slowly as his breath steadied. He realized this was not the end, but only the beginning of something much darker, a game where love, betrayal, and survival tangled together, and the stakes were far higher than he had ever imagined. As he stared into her tear-filled eyes, he knew one thing with brutal certainty. The truth was not just about betrayal, it was about danger, and the next step could either save them all or destroy everything. And then her phone buzzed in her pocket, a sharp sound in the tense silence. She pulled it out, and her face drained of color as she read the message, her hands trembling violently. She turned the screen toward him, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A photograph of the triplets sitting at the restaurant table, taken from outside the window only minutes ago, with a single message beneath it: choose now, or lose them forever. His chest tightened as he stared at the glowing screen. The photograph burned into his eyes, the triplets smiling innocently behind the glass while someone out there lurked close enough to capture them. His pulse roared in his ears as fear replaced rage. For the first time in years, the man who had conquered boardrooms and bent markets to his will felt utterly powerless. His instinct screamed that this was not Marcus playing alone. This was bigger, sharper, colder, a warning shot from an enemy who had been watching all along. His ex-wife clutched the phone close to her chest, her shoulders trembling. She whispered that this was exactly why she had stayed hidden, exactly why she had raised the children in secrecy, because the danger had never left. It had only waited for the right moment to strike. Her voice cracked as she said they were running out of time. The millionaire pressed his hands into his hair, dragging in a ragged breath, his mind racing. He wanted to storm back into the restaurant and scoop up the children, but he knew that eyes were already on them. Whoever had sent that message was close, closer than he wanted to admit. The night air thickened with dread. The city sounds muted, as if swallowed by the fear wrapping around them. He grabbed her hand, despite her attempt to pull away, his voice low but firm as he told her that hiding had never saved anyone, that secrets had only fed the monster, that now was the time to fight back. Her eyes searched his face, torn between trust and terror. She whispered that fighting back could cost the children their lives. He squeezed her hand tighter, his jaws set with grim determination. He told her they had already stolen years from him. He would not let them steal his children. The restaurant door creaked open behind them, and the triplets rushed out, their small feet tapping against the pavement, their laughter innocent and sweet, unaware of the storm swirling around them. One of them held a half-eaten piece of bread, another clutched a napkin folded into a paper bird. The sight of them nearly broke him, his heart aching with a fierce protective love he had never known until this moment. He crouched down quickly, forcing a smile as he gathered them close, his arms wrapping around their small shoulders, his ex-wife watching with silent tears sliding down her cheeks. In that fragile moment of contact he realized how much he had lost. Birthdays missed, lullabies unsung, questions unanswered. Yet here they were, flesh and blood, fragile yet resilient, and he vowed silently that he would never let anyone tear them from him again. But the vow barely formed when a black car rolled slowly down the street, its windows tinted, its pace deliberate. The children pointed curiously, but he felt the air change, his body tense, his instincts screaming danger. The car did not stop. It drifted past, but the message had been clear. Eyes were on them. Choices had to be made. He stood quickly, pulling the children closer to their mother, whispering urgently that they had to leave, that staying in the open was suicide. His ex-wife nodded, though her face was pale, fear written in every line. She said there was a safe place not far, somewhere she had prepared for nights like this. He did not question her. Not now. He simply ushered them forward, every muscle coiled, his gaze darting over every shadow, every stranger's face, as if the whole city had turned into a trap designed to swallow them whole. They moved quickly through the narrow streets, the children giggling at first as if it were a game, but soon falling silent as they sensed the tension, their small hands gripping tightly. The ex-wife led the way, her steps fast, her eyes scanning corners with practiced caution, and he realized with a jolt that she had been living like this for years, a ghost in the city, hunted and hiding. The thought carved deep guilt into his chest, that while he had lived in mansions and flown in private jets, she had been running from shadows with 3 children who should have been safe under his roof. Finally, they reached an old building tucked between taller modern towers, its facade worn but sturdy. She pulled out a key and led them inside, up narrow stairs to a dimly lit apartment, the curtains thick, the locks heavy, every detail designed for secrecy rather than comfort. The children flopped onto a worn couch, yawning. Oblivious to the danger, he stood in the center of the room, trying to control the storm in his mind. The ex-wife shut the final lock and leaned against the door, breathing heavily, her hands shaking as she whispered that they had to decide, that whoever was watching would not stop now, and that Marcus was only the beginning. He stepped closer, his voice rough with urgency. He demanded names. He demanded to know exactly who they were dealing with. She hesitated, then finally sank onto a chair, her eyes hollow. She whispered that years ago Marcus had fallen in with dangerous people, men who controlled money through fear and blood, and when she found out she had begged him to walk away, but he had laughed. He said power like that was worth any price. Her voice cracked as she explained that she had stumbled onto one of their secrets by accident, and that was the night Marcus came to her, warning that if she told her husband, if she stayed, the children she carried would never be born. Her words sliced him open, his fists clenching. He wanted to shout, to rage, but he forced himself to listen. She said Marcus had promised her safety only if she vanished, only if she raised the children in silence. She had believed him, because the look in his eyes that night was not of a man bluffing. It was of a man already owned by something darker, something that would burn anyone who stood in its way. Tears streaked her face as she whispered that she had chosen survival, not betrayal, that every night she had prayed for him, for the children, but she could never risk exposing them to the monsters that Marcus served. The millionaire staggered back, his chest heaving, the image of Marcus grinning in the street twisting in his mind. He realized now it had never been just about money or betrayal. It had been about control, about using fear to keep them apart. But something in him shifted then, a cold, sharp clarity. He had faced men who thought themselves untouchable before. He had clawed his empire from the jaws of those who wanted him broken, and he was not about to let shadowy enemies steal his family. He stepped forward, his eyes burning with resolve. He told her that no matter what secrets Marcus carried, no matter how dangerous the enemy, he would not run. He would fight, for her, for the children, for everything they had stolen. She shook her head, whispering that he did not understand, that this was not a war fought in boardrooms or contracts, that these men destroyed lives without hesitation. But he silenced her with a fierce look. He said he had already lost too much, and if it meant facing hell itself, he would walk straight into the fire. Her lips parted as if to argue, but before she could, the window rattled sharply. The children screamed, and a brick crashed through the glass, landing on the floor with a dull, heavy thud. Attached to it was a note. He snatched it up with trembling hands, the handwriting bold and merciless, the words short and brutal. "You have until midnight to choose. Walk away or bury them." The silence that followed was deafening. The children clung to their mother, sobbing. His ex-wife's face crumpled with terror, and he felt his pulse surge with fury so strong it nearly blinded him. Midnight was only hours away. The enemy had set the clock ticking, the trap closing in, and for the first time he understood the full weight of the storm pressing down on them. There was no more hiding, no more waiting. The past had caught them, and the only way forward was through fire and blood. The shattered glass crunched beneath his shoes as he stood frozen with the note in his hands, the words seared into his mind. Like fire, his jaw tightened until it ached his chest, heaving with fury and fear mixed into one. The children sobbed against their mother's arms, their small bodies trembling. The ex-wife whispered soothing words, though her own voice shook and her eyes glistened with terror. She looked at him, then her lips, quivering as she begged him to listen to reason, to take the children and run before it was too late. But the thought of running cut through him like betrayal, because running was what had already stolen years from him, and he could not bear to surrender again. He crouched down in front of the children, his heart breaking as he brushed their hair back, whispering gently that they were safe, that he would not let anyone hurt them, though deep down his stomach churned with dread, because he knew the men behind this threat were not ones who made empty promises. He kissed the top of each child's head, as if sealing a vow, then rose slowly, his gaze hard as stone, his voice low but sharp, as he told her that midnight was not a deadline, it was an opportunity they wanted him to break. They wanted him to crawl, but instead he would fight. She shook her head violently, tears streaming, her voice rising with panic as she said he did not understand that these people did not lose, that they erased anyone who stood in their way. She pleaded that he had no idea what kind of power Marcus had dragged himself into, but he stepped closer, gripping her shoulders firmly, his eyes blazing, as he told her that he had faced monsters of his own kind, that he had built empires under the threat of ruin and betrayal, and that he would rather die standing than live another day knowing he had abandoned his children again. His words cracked something inside her. Her face softened, though pain still etched every line. She whispered that she had left him to protect him, and that if she lost him now she would never forgive herself. The clock ticked relentlessly, each second a hammer against their chests. The triplets huddled together on the couch, whispering to each other in frightened tones. He paced the room, his mind racing through every contact, every resource, every strategy he had used in his years of building his empire. He had fought with contracts and lawyers, not bullets and threats, but he knew the rules of power were the same. Whoever controlled fear controlled the game, and right now the enemy thought fear belonged to them. He would have to take it back. He pulled out his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed a number he had sworn never to call again. The line clicked, a gravelly voice answered, cautious, then sharp with recognition. The millionaire's voice was steady, though his heart thundered. He said he needed protection. He said he needed eyes on the city tonight. The man on the other end hesitated, then asked if this had to do with Marcus. The silence that followed was answer enough. The voice promised men within the hour, a debt repaid from years ago. And the call ended, leaving the room heavy with unspoken questions. His ex-wife stared at him, disbelief and fear colliding in her expression. She whispered that involving outsiders could put them all in more danger, but he shook his head, his resolve firm, saying the danger was already here, and that he would not face it blind. The triplets stirred, one asking softly why the window was broken, why their mother was crying. The millionaire knelt by them again, forcing his voice gentle, telling them that sometimes bad people tried to scare good people, but that he was here now, and he would never let those bad people win. The children clung to him, as if they had known him their whole lives, and his chest ached with both joy and grief at the bond forming in the shadow of fear. He looked at their mother, and in her eyes he saw the same grief, the same longing, but also a flicker of hope. She had tried to bury ours. Stretched thin, the room, tense with silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock and the shallow breaths of those waiting. Suddenly a knock thundered against the door, 3 sharp raps, the kind that carried weight. The millionaire stiffened, motioning for silence. He moved cautiously toward the door, hand tightening around the heavy lamp he had pulled from the table as a weapon. His ex-wife pulled the children close, her face pale. He called out, demanding a name, and after a beat, a voice replied, one he recognized from the phone call. His men had arrived. Relief washed over him as he unlatched the locks, letting in 2 broad-shouldered figures, their eyes sweeping the room with quick assessment. They nodded at him, one handing over a small device, a phone secure, untraceable. They said time was short, that Marcus had been spotted only blocks away, moving with others, men, not strangers but professionals, dangerous ones. The millionaire's heart sank as he realized this was no idle threat. The net was already tightening. His ex-wife clutched the children tighter, her whisper almost lost in the air, saying they had found them already. The men insisted they had to move now, to a secondary location more secure. They had vehicles waiting. The millionaire hesitated, torn between trusting old debts and fearing new betrayals. But the note on the floor, the shattered glass, the car that had passed by, these were no coincidences. The enemy was circling, and he had no choice. He gathered the children, urging them to be brave, telling them it was another adventure. They clutched his hands, tiny fingers squeezing his own, and for the first time, he felt what it meant to be their father, not in blood alone, but in presence, in sacrifice, in protection. They slipped into the night, escorted on either side by the men, the streets eerily quiet, the city alive but unaware of the danger weaving through its veins. Headlights glared as they reached the vehicle, a black SUV armored and waiting. The children were ushered inside. Their mother, close behind the millionaire, paused, scanning the shadows, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. And then it happened. A figure detached from the darkness, a flash of silver in his hand, and the night erupted in chaos. One of his men lunged, intercepting the attack, the sound of struggle tearing through the silence. The millionaire shoved his family into the vehicle, shouting for them to stay down. He turned back in time to see Marcus emerge from the alley, his smile cruel, his eyes glinting with madness. He clapped slowly, mockingly, his voice dripping with venom as he said the clock had ticked down faster than expected, that the choice had been made, and that it was already too late. The millionaire's blood boiled as he stepped forward, his fists clenched, his voice thunderous as he demanded to know what Marcus really wanted, why he had stalked them like prey, and what the children had to do with this game. Marcus's laughter sliced through the night. He said it was never about the millionaire, it was about legacy, about power, about control. He pointed to the SUV, his words cruel as he revealed that the children were more than just heirs. They were the key to something bigger, something the millionaire did not yet understand, something Marcus intended to claim for himself. His ex-wife screamed from inside the vehicle, her voice raw with desperation, telling Marcus to stop, telling him that the children were innocent. Marcus only smirked, tilting his head, as if innocence was nothing but currency waiting to be spent. The millionaire's vision blurred with fury, his body lunging forward. But before he could reach Marcus, a sudden roar split the night. An explosion behind them, lighting up the street with fire and glass. The SUV rocked violently. The children screamed, and his heart nearly burst from his chest as he spun around, eyes wide with horror. The flames reflecting in his gaze, the explosion roared like thunder, ripping through the night heat, and smoke surged outward. The SUV shuddered under the impact, glass shattered across the street. The children shrieked, their cries piercing through the chaos. The millionaire's heart stopped for a breath. His body moving before thought, he tore open the door and pulled them into his arms one by one, their small bodies trembling as ash drifted down like snow. His ex-wife clung to them, sobbing, her voice frantic, calling their names as if repeating them could keep them alive. Marcus stood just beyond the glow of the flames, his smile twisted, his laughter low and cruel, his eyes glinting with satisfaction, as if every scream, every tear had been orchestrated for his pleasure. The millionaire's blood boiled. He lunged forward, but one of his men grabbed his arm, shouting that it was a trap, that Marcus was never here to fight, that he was only here to watch destruction unfold, and then vanish into shadow again. The millionaire's chest heaved, his fists clenched, yet he knew the man was right. Marcus was already slipping back into the night. His words carried over the roar of the fire, echoing like poison. He shouted that midnight was almost upon them, and that soon the children would no longer be his. To protect, the fire raged too close, forcing them to retreat down the street. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing nearer. The millionaire guided his family into a narrow alley, the children coughing from the smoke, their tiny faces streaked with soot, their mother trembling but holding them tight. His men closed in around them, scanning rooftops and shadows, guns drawn, voices sharp as they urged him to keep moving. The city had turned hostile. Every streetlight, every window, a potential eye watching, waiting for the next strike. They reached another vehicle hidden in the shadows, a battered van that looked nothing like protection, but was chosen for that very reason, anonymity over strength. The family piled inside his ex-wife, rocking the children, whispering soothing words. Though her voice cracked with every breath, the millionaire sat across from them, his eyes burning into the floor, his mind racing with rage and guilt. He whispered that Marcus would pay, that every man behind this would fall. His voice trembling with both fury and despair. One of his men placed a hand on his shoulder, saying revenge would mean nothing if the children did not survive until dawn. The van jolted forward, weaving through backstreets, away from the chaos, sirens fading behind them. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the muffled sobs of children. The millionaire reached for their small hands, gripping them tightly, whispering that he was there, that they were safe, even though his chest ached with the lie. He turned to his ex-wife, asking again for the truth, the whole truth, because only knowledge would let him fight the war. She lowered her gaze, her lips pressed tight before she finally spoke, her words soft but laced with pain. She said Marcus had not simply betrayed him, he had stolen something greater, something hidden in those children. The millionaire frowned, confusion colliding with dread. She explained that when she left pregnant, Marcus had already known the children would carry more than bloodline. They would carry secrets tied to the empire the millionaire had unknowingly built. She told him that years ago certain documents, certain codes had been embedded into their lives. Without his knowledge, Marcus left behind in his own investments, properties and offshore accounts, hidden keys to fortunes and power that no enemy had ever unlocked. Marcus had discovered this by accident and realized the children born of him would be the final keys, the legacy encrypted in their very existence. Millionaire staggered back, his chest heaving, the revelation crushing down on him. The rage of betrayal grew heavier than before. Marcus had not just taken his partnership, his trust, and his family, he had twisted his very bloodline into a tool for power. The children were not targets by coincidence. They were the map, the vault, the final puzzle to an empire worth more than gold. His ex-wife wept, her voice shaking as she said she had kept it from him because she knew the truth would destroy him. He stared at her, his heart torn between fury and grief, but above it all, love for the children burned brighter than every lith. The van screeched to a halt. The men shouted orders. Chaos erupting once more. Bullets tore through the night, sparks flaring as metal screamed the enemy had found them. Again shouts filled the alley. The driver cursed as he swerved, trying to protect the passengers. The millionaire threw himself over, the children shielding them with his body, his ex-wife clutching them tightly, screams echoing as one of his men fell, another firing back, the night becoming a storm of gunfire and shadows. The millionaire's blood pounded, his instincts taking control. He grabbed the fallen man's weapon, his hands steady though his heart thundered. He fired into the shadows, not as a businessman, not as a millionaire, but as a father fighting for his children. Each shot a vow, each echo a promise that he would never let Marcus or any man tear them from him. The enemy faltered, pulling back into the night, sirens wailing closer, the men shouting for retreat. The van roared forward again, lurching through the chaos, smoke trailing in its wake. The family huddled together, eyes wide with terror, hearts bound by survival. The children clung to him, whispering they wanted to go home, but he realized home no longer existed. The life he had known was ashes. The empire he had built was a battlefield. He looked at their mother, her face streaked with tears, yet fierce with determination. She whispered that they had to end this tonight, that running would only feed Marcus's power, that the only way to survive was to confront him before midnight struck. He nodded, his chest heavy with fear yet blazing with resolve. They would face Marcus together, and they would finish this. The van rolled to a stop in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse, his men checking corners, declaring it safe for now. The millionaire helped the children out there, small hands gripping his tightly. He whispered promises that he would keep them safe, though his own chest ached with doubt. His ex-wife pressed close, whispering that Marcus would be here soon, because Marcus always knew where to find them. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second a reminder that time was nearly gone. They gathered inside the warehouse, the air thick with dust and echoes. The millionaire stood in the center, his family behind him, his men spread out, weapons ready. His heart pounded, each beat a drum of war. He knew Marcus would come because Marcus thrived on spectacle, on control, and this confrontation was inevitably end. As the clock struck closer to midnight, footsteps echoed in the shadows, slow, deliberate, heavy with arrogance. Marcus stepped into the dim light, his smile sharp, his eyes burning with hunger. He clapped slowly, his voice dripping with venom, as he declared that the game was over, that the children were his legacy now, and that the millionaire's bloodline would serve him or die with him. The millionaire stepped forward, his fists clenched, his voice thunderous with rage as he shouted that Marcus would never touch them, that this ended tonight. The children whimpered behind their mother, their small voices trembling, asking if it was over yet, asking if they were safe. The millionaire's chest ached as he looked back at them, love flooding through him, stronger than fear, stronger than betrayal. He turned back to Marcus, his resolve unbreakable, his body bracing for the final clash, and then suddenly from the far corner of the warehouse, another set of footsteps rang out, a shadow emerging, a figure neither he nor his ex-wife expected, a figure who carried with him the power to shift the entire battle. The warehouse air thickened as the figure stepped from the shadows, the flickering light catching the sharp lines of his face. The millionaire's breath caught, because it was not an enemy he expected, but his own estranged father, the man who had abandoned him decades ago, the man whose absence had carved an emptiness into his childhood, a man he had sworn never to forgive. Yet here he was, older, colder eyes that carried both regret and power, his voice steady as he said the war had never been between Marcus and the millionaire alone, but had begun long before, in secrets buried in the family's past. The millionaire staggered back, disbelief surging through his veins. His father explained in a voice that echoed through the vast warehouse that the empire his son thought he had built alone was built on blood money, hidden alliances, promises made to men who never forgot debts. Marcus had unearthed those truths and twisted them to his own ends, and the children now carried the weight of it all, the legacy encrypted not just in wealth but in betrayal. The millionaire's ex-wife gasped, her hand clutched over her mouth as she realized the chain that had bound them all had started long before they were even born. Laughter rang out, mocking, sharp as steel. He clapped slowly, saying at last the whole family was reunited, that secrets had been dragged into the light where they belonged. He raised his gun, his eyes gleaming with madness. He declared that he would burn the bloodline to ash if they did not surrender the children, that the legacy belonged to him now, not to the man who had abandoned it, and certainly not to the man who had wasted it. The millionaire's rage surged hotter than fire, his fists tightening around the weapon in his hands. His voice thundered across the space as he shouted that no man, no father, no traitor would decide his children's fate. His father's gaze softened for a flicker, his voice low as he admitted his greatest sin had been walking away, leaving his son to fight the world alone. He said he had returned not for redemption but for a final stand, that the sins of the past could only be ended by blood. His eyes met his son's, and for the first time the millionaire saw not abandonment but a man carrying the weight of regret. Marcus sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger, the seconds dragging like eternity. The millionaire's children cried out, clutching their mother, their small voices calling for their father, calling for him to protect them. The moment shattered with gunfire, thunder echoing across the warehouse. Chaos erupted, Marcus firing wildly, the millionaire diving forward, his men retaliating, bullets striking sparks off steel beams. The children screamed, his ex-wife shielding them with her own body. The millionaire's father stepped into the storm, his weapon blazing, his voice roaring as he told his son to protect the children at all costs. The millionaire fought like a man possessed, every shot fueled by rage and love and desperation. Marcus screamed with fury as his men fell one by one, until only he remained standing, his face twisted with hatred, his gun shaking as he aimed it directly at the children. Time slowed the millionaire's heart, stopped his body, moved without thought. He threw himself in front of the shot, his chest exploding with pain, fire ripping through him. His knees buckling, he collapsed, but even as darkness edged his vision, he heard his children's cries, their screams echoing through the vast hollow space. His father roared with fury, charging Marcus with a strength born of regret and love, and in one final clash the two men fell, their bodies crashing into the shadows. Gunfire silenced, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing sobs and the ticking clock striking midnight. The millionaire gasped for breath, his body trembling, his vision blurred. His ex-wife crawled to him, tears pouring down her face, her voice breaking as she begged him to hold on. The children clung to him, their tiny hands gripping his own, their voices desperate, calling him daddy. For the very first time the word pierced him deeper than any bullet, yet filled him with a light brighter than the pain. He whispered through blood and tears that they were his everything, that they had given his life, meaning that he would fight until his last breath for them in the distance. Marcus's laughter faltered, replaced by choking silence. His father's voice rasped low, saying it was done, saying the blood debt was finally ended. The millionaire forced his eyes open to see his father, lying wounded but alive, his face pale yet At peace, he whispered that he was proud that his son had become more than him, that he had chosen love over power, and then his eyes closed, leaving the weight of a lifetime behind. The millionaire felt tears blur his vision, but his children's voices kept him anchored to life, pulling him back from the edge. The men who had stood by him gathered the family, pulling them to safety. The night outside quiet now, the city unaware of the storm that had passed within its bones. The millionaire staggered to his feet, his chest aching, his body battered, but his heart stronger than it had ever been. His ex-wife leaned against him, their children between them. Her eyes red, yet filled with a glimmer of hope. She whispered that they had survived, that the nightmare was finally over. He kissed her forehead, his voice rough, as he promised that the years stolen would be reclaimed, that every moment from now on would be lived together as a family. The dawn broke slowly, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The millionaire watched the sun rise, his children holding his hands, their laughter tentative yet real. For the first time he felt the weight of wealth and power fall away, leaving only the raw truth of love and survival. He whispered to them that sometimes losing everything was the only way to find what truly mattered, that sometimes betrayal was the road to forgiveness, and that, from this day forward, their story would not be written by enemies or shadows, but by the choices they made together. The city stirred awake, unaware of the battles fought in its dark corners, but inside the heart of a man once defined by money and control, something new had been born. He was no longer just a millionaire, he was a father, a protector, a man remade by fire and loss and love. And as he held his family close, he knew that the legacy Marcus had chased was meaningless compared to the legacy he would build now, a legacy of truth and strength and love that no enemy could ever erase. So the story ended, not with the silence of defeat, but with the fragile laughter of children, the steady heartbeat of hope, and the unshakable vow of a man who had found his true self in the very moment he nearly lost everything. The end.